Okay, so welcome back everybody to the webinar here at BINA. Once again, we'll be doing this in two ways. Either you're watching this on Facebook Live or you're watching this on www.bina.com.au/live. So you might be seeing me on two screens, or you might not be seeing me at all, which leads us to today's topic. Webinars in Halacha. So we're not only going to discuss webinars, we'll discuss, of course, webinars, FaceTime, Skype, Facebook Live, webcams, speakerphones, or maybe not speakerphones because that's a little bit too old-fashioned. But either way, there are things in Judaism, in Yiddishkeit, which we are obligated to hear or see or partake in. Do those things work over in an electronic way? So if I need to hear, for example, the Megillah on Purim, we'll get through more examples later, but if I need to hear, I'm obligated to hear the Megillah on Purim. Can I hear that through a microphone, which is electronic? Can I hear that through a phone call or through Facebook Live or something like that? And basically the question goes down to, halachically, if you're seeing me over a video screen, is that considered you seeing me? Are you hearing me, or are you just hearing or seeing an electronic form of me or my voice? So that's really the question over here. So like everything, we need to go back all the way to the sources, way before any of these things were even invented. But of course, everything in Torah is spoken about. It's just a question of if we can find it. And like we did last week, today's webinar will be based on the book Headlines. So in the Talmud, Tractate Rosh Hashanah, Daf Chav Daled Amud Aleph, it talks about over there the two Eidim, the two witnesses that come and testify about the fact that they saw the new moon. So in olden times, nowadays we have a calendar. So today is Rosh Chodesh of, the first day of the month of Av. How do we know that? Well, we have a calendar on our wall, and I could have told you that a couple of months ago, or way before that, years ago, when Rosh Chodesh of would be in the year 5777. However, in olden times, it wasn't like that. In olden times, you didn't know it was the first day of the month till it was the first day of the month. Because the way the Torah tells us to establish the months was that two witnesses should see the new moon. They come and testify in the high court in Jerusalem, and they interrogate them to make sure that they actually saw it. And if their testimony comes out to be correct, they establish Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the new month. How about if two witnesses saw the new moon in a pool of water or a river? So in other words, they saw the reflection of the moon in the water. What is the halacha then? And the Gemara over there says that that is not considered, that is not a good testimony. If two witnesses come to Beis Din, come to court, and they say, we saw the reflection of the new moon in the water, that would not be considered a good testimony. But here comes the question. What is the reasoning behind that passage in the Talmud? And from the reasoning, we can then apply it to technology today. So, one way of explaining that would be that when you see the reflection of the moon, you haven't seen the moon. So in other words, Torah requires the witnesses to actually see the moon, but they didn't see the moon. They saw the reflection of the moon. Another way of explaining it is that no, actually the reflection of the moon would be considered seeing the moon. It's just a question of when you see the reflection of the moon in the water, is that a clear vision? Or maybe you're seeing something else. Maybe it's a reflection of the street lamp or a light that you're seeing. In other words, it's not really the moon that you're seeing a reflection of. So in other words, there are two ways of understanding what's wrong with seeing the reflection of the moon in the water. One way of understanding it would be that you're not seeing the moon, and Torah requires you to see the moon. Another way to understand it, no, actually, when you see the reflection, you are seeing a reflection of the moon. It's just a question of being unclear, and therefore it's not a good testimony because it's unclear what exactly you're seeing. Rabbeinu Hananel, one of the early commentaries on the Gemara, on the Talmud, seems to imply like the second way, because he says that the whole case is talking about when the witnesses say like this, we saw the new moon, a reflection of the new moon in the water, then we looked up to the sky and we didn't see anything. So in other words, he seems to imply that the issue here isn't that we're seeing the reflection. The issue here is that perhaps they didn't see anything. They didn't even see a reflection of the moon at all. And so too other commentators also explain that way in the Talmud. Now, this would also, the Chida, another halachic authority, brings a question regarding how about if a witness saw someone perform a crime, but the witness saw it through a mirror. Halachically, would that be considered a good testimony? And he brings somebody who tries to bring a proof that, hey, look, witnesses who saw the new moon, a reflection in the river, that wasn't considered a good testimony. But he says there's a very big difference, because the reflection in the water is unclear, but a mirror, that's clear. When you see something through a mirror, although you haven't actually seen what happened behind you, but you're looking straight ahead in the mirror, that is actually, you're seeing it clearly, you know exactly what you saw. So from here we see again that the whole issue wasn't that you're seeing a reflection, the issue is that you're not sure what exactly you saw a reflection of. But if you were sure, it actually would be a good testimony. So let's bring this back to our discussion. Technology, your voice going through electronically, through a microphone, through a phone, through webinars, through whatever the case is, seems to be a similar concept like a reflection. Because it's not me, you're not seeing me, you're seeing, so to speak, a created image of me. Just like when you see something through a mirror, you're not seeing the thing, you're seeing a created image of it. So to sound, so to visual, it should be the same thing. So whatever you say about that, at first glance, you would also imply that same reasoning to seeing something electronically or hearing something electronically. To actually bring this into what contemporary halachic authorities have to say about this, which is obviously where we would have to look, we cannot decide these decisions on our own. So it seems to be a dispute, of course, between two great halachic authorities of our generation, Reb Moshe Feinstein and Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So Reb Moshe seems to rule that, left with no other choice, he happens to be talking about hearing the Megillah on Purim. So he says, left with no other choice, you can hear the Megillah over a microphone. Or he also talks about if someone is stuck in hospital, God forbid, and they can't make Havdalah, which is what you do at the end of Shabbos, themselves, they can hear it on the phone, things like that. Left with no other choice, he says, you would fulfill your obligation. Why? Because when I read the Megillah and you hear it straight from me without a microphone, what are you hearing? You're hearing voice, sound created by me. So when I speak into a microphone, that's also sound created by me. Okay, not directly, but through me speaking into the microphone, a sound came out. So he doesn't really seem to see a difference between voice coming through a microphone or voice coming out of my mouth. They're both generated by me moving my lips. However, just to point out that he does say that one should actually not do this. You only should do this if left with no other choice, but you shouldn't really do this what we call lechatchila, which means in the first instance, because he says the tradition is that Megillah is read without a microphone. That's the way it's been done, and that's the way it should continue to be done. And he says that one should not do this when it comes to Torah obligations. So for example, if someone wants to fulfill their obligation of saying the Shema, and they want to hear someone else saying it, or a better example, if someone wants to hear someone else say the after blessing after one eats bread, which is a biblical commandment, one would not be able to fulfill the obligation electronically, he says. So it's not 100% clear. He's willing to rely on it when it comes to rabbinic obligations, even then only when left with no other choice. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, however, says that it's not an original sound. When Torah says you need to hear something, it needs to be an original sound coming out of a person's mouth, not sound going through something else which generates another sound, which is not the person's voice. So he says that you would not be able to fulfill your obligation. So these two halachic authorities both lived before the creation of Skype and Facebook Live and all these things. They were talking about more over the phone and through a microphone. However, it seems to be, perhaps we can say, again, obviously, when it comes down to it, one should obviously consult a halachic authority, a rabbi, but just in theory, we can say that the same thing applies to a video. A video is just a visual which is created by me doing something. So I'm here, you see me, so according to Reb Moshe, it would left to the last resort, you would be able to hear it that way. According to Reb Shlomo Zalman, you would not. Let's go now and bring more specific examples and see what other halachic authorities have to say about this. How about hearing Kedusha or saying Amen to Kaddish over the phone, or more modern day technology through Facebook Live or webinars or webcam and things like that, or Skype? So there's a responsa by Rav Kook, he says he's of the opinion that if you hear Kaddish over the phone, you should actually answer Amen. And he quotes a law in the Jewish code of law that if somebody is very far from a minyan, so you're not really part of the minyan, you're very far away, but there's a chazan with a loud booming voice and you manage to hear the Kaddish anyway, the halacha is that you should answer Amen. So in other words, you don't necessarily have to be part of the minyan to answer Amen to the Kaddish. Now, obviously, there it's talking about when you heard the actual voice of the chazan, he's talking about over the phone, but obviously he is going along the same lines of Rav Moshe, that electronic voice has the same halachic status as the voice. Now, he actually does say, there's an interesting thing to point out, he says that one should refrain from doing this because there's another issue. Because it says that you should try not to hear Kaddish, even if you're far away, if in between you and the minyan there is either idol worship or dirty places. And since when you hear things electronically over the phone, there's probably going to be one of those two things in between. Therefore, he says you should refrain from doing it. But if you happen to be on the phone and someone was in shul and you overheard the Kaddish, then he says you can rely on the opinion that it should be okay and you can answer it. However, he doesn't talk about video because, again, he lived before these things were invented. Probably the same reasoning would apply. However, obviously, this is all talking about answering Amen or Kedusha and all these things. He is not talking about being part of a minyan. Being part of a minyan, having 10 men in one room constituting a quorum of called a minyan, and therefore you can do all of these things like Kedusha and read the Torah, etc. You need 10 people, 10 men in one room. In fact, even if there's a wall in between one person and the other 9, it will be very problematic, and not necessarily would that be considered that there is a minyan in the room. Now, although it does say that if you can see the face of the other person, even if there's a wall, it counts, but it seems to imply that that's if the person is very close by. If somebody is thousands of miles away and you're just all getting together on a Skype or a live webcam or whatever the case is, that would obviously not constitute a minyan. The expression which is used about a minyan, the holiness of a minyan, is akol be'asara shchinta sharia. On 10, literally on the house of 10, the divine presence rests. The house of 10 implies 10 people in one house. So, sorry everybody, unfortunately we're still going to have to wake up very early to daven Shachris in the morning, but it's definitely an interesting discussion nonetheless. Please God, on Thursday we'll continue with more examples. Have a wonderful